We have a quorum. And that is okay. And our owl, great. Sound check, Steve, can you hear us okay? Okay, fantastic. So with that, I'll call this meeting of the Grand County Planning Commission to order. Pull up my agenda real quick. We have some guests in the audience. Are y'all here just to listen in, or did you want to make a comment?
We're here for the public hearing.
The public hearing, of course, perfect. All right. So with no citizens to be heard, we'll move on to ex parte communications and disclosures. We do have a public hearing today. So just a reminder, we do need to share any ex parte communications that we have had with the applicant or their agents outside of public meetings, or any disclosures, conflicts of interest. Does anybody have any to discuss and put on the record?
I'll just throw out that my wife is on the board for HASU, which I don't think at all affects anything. So I will not recuse myself from that portion.
But thank you for the awareness. I think that's great. So thanks, Steve. Okay, we'll move on to approval of meeting minutes. And Steve, I'm going to bring, Steve had made a comment just generally about our minute structure, but I'm going to save that for future considerations. So we'll just, for this, just review the minutes for accuracy or comments. Any discussion? Otherwise, I will entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Okay. So motion to
Sorry, where would I throw in a couple comments? I just noticed a few
So we
things.
have a motion on the table to approve by OB, a second by McKenna to adopt the May 23rd minutes. Steve, discussion, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm having issues toggling screens here. One minor thing I just don't is it, I can't think of, I didn't write his last name down. Is it Wes or West? Our consultant on, I think that was is that the transportation plan? Let me look here. Yeah, discussion item number 2, County Commission updates. It says West Bloomberg. I wasn't sure if his name was West or West, so I know it's very minor, just throwing that out there because it stood out to me. So we need to edit that. And then my second point, which is related to the comment that, well, I guess we'll get to at future considerations. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to write where I saw this. I have the quote in my notes. Give me one second here. Okay, here on it's page 5 of our packet, where it says challenges are multifaceted, water, limited resources density. From PC perspective, RE applicants, it feels like the goal is I want to build houses and I want to make money. Applicants are coming right out and saying that. That's really just kind of the root of my comment of my sharing my concern that there aren't names attached. And so I feel like a broad statement like that says that there's united agreement within the Planning Commission. And I think there's some nuance that's a little bit lost. So I think maybe just for the record, I want to say that I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, that developers are coming right out and saying they want to develop and make money. I think people ought to make money for the multi-year projects that they invest their time in. So what we do with that in this, whether we approve the minutes or not, I just want to the record to state my perspective on that.
Thanks, Steve. I made that edit and was briefed a little bit about your concerns with the minutes, so I'll take that in consideration and do that forward.
Awesome, appreciate it.
So just to, I mean, I think it's probably maybe worth just taking this now. One of the things we had discussed was time stamping, because given the fact that everything is streamed on YouTube and available after the fact, but we wanted to, so it used to be that we didn't capture any of the crosstalk and discussion. We only captured action items, and then decided we wanted to have more of a record of the crosstalk. And because it was live streamed, there was some discussion. This was like a year or two ago, the body decided that the recording was sufficient as the source of truth, but that we should timestamp major decisions, pivot in the conversation, or topic items. And we can, I mean, I'm open to changing the format however the group wants to, but I think let's just agree on the standard and see if we can adopt it into our bylaws and just make it consistent. Because I see your concern, and I also want to make sure that it's, we don't, trade clarity for having 10-page long
Too
minutes.
much information.
So why don't we come back to that during future considerations, but I think it's a really great thing to call out and one we should be assertive about addressing. That sound good?
That sounds great to me.
All right. Any other comments, Steve?
Oh, that's it.
Did anyone else have any comments about the minutes? Okay. So we have a motion by OB and a second by Maketa. I think it's sufficient to adopt the minutes given the misspelling of Wes Bloomberg's name, which sounds like it's already been corrected. It just wasn't reflected in our packet.
Is it west or west? No, sorry.
Let's confirm and let's update it. Okay. All in favor of adopting the May 23rd minutes, raise your hands, say aye.
Aye.
That is all in favor
Yes, I
with
forgot.
Tony absent. Okay, so we will move on to our public hearing of the evening, which is the Arroyo Crossing amended PUD master plan. The way that we'll run this public hearing, we'll have a report by staff. We will invite the applicant. Who's the applicant's agent on this one?
This is Sherry.
So Sherry or Caitlin would make the comments. So we'll invite you to make a comment if you would like. For context, it's not required. Then we'll open the public hearing. And then we'll move on to discussion.
Thank you. So yes, we have the Arroyo Crossing PUD amendment to their master plan. And this is kind of, it's a formality that we have to go through, but it's really a minor amendment to the master plan. It's just to do an update for the housing typologies as well as the setbacks. They weren't very clear. They were missing setbacks for the townhomes, and then there was a section of where they called out duplexes, and it was actually supposed to be townhomes. And so because with duplexes, you share a lot, and these actually have lot lines going through them. So we just wanted to clarify that on the master plan, and I'm not going to really go into all the history of the project. You all are familiar with Arroyo Crossing. So that's really all it is. And then we have our stated motion there that just guides that. So if there are any clarifying questions that you all have, I can answer them. Or
There's no questions for staff. We'll invite the applicant to speak if you'd like to. Sherry, if you want.
Where's your camera at?
the microphone is the owl right
It'll
there.
find you. It's 360.
So Sherry Griffith, I'm now the chair of the Moab Area Community Land Trust and Arroyo Crossing. Most of you know Caitlin, when she was with the county. She's now the executive director. We're very excited to have her. This is a really simple update and change and correction. I just wanted to give you a brief update at Arroyo Crossing if you haven't been out there. We have 14 homes under construction. We have almost 50 within the self-build coming on in the next year or so. We have a LIHTC application for the 32-unit apartment for rent. We have a developer putting in 12 paraprofessional twin homes for, for kind of that missing middle. And then we have Utah Housing Corporation looking at the 24 cottages. So we have a lot happening. It's finally, we've been struggling with this for 2 years, and it's coming to fruition. So we're very excited about how it's coming along, but we'll probably be back again because we're finding little corrections, right? And it's a project that big and it was a dream. Now we're having to take that dream and make it a reality, and then there's some little quirks here and there. So I appreciate all your support in us working it through, and staff has been amazingly helpful, and we really appreciate it.
Sherry kind of covered it. We're excited. We've had so much bottleneck over the last couple of years, and so now we're just kind of exploding with a lot of different development partners all kind of at the same time. So it's been a crazy couple of months, but in the next couple of years, we'll have over 100 units at Aurora Crossing. So we're really excited about that.
And in total, we'll have about 300, about half of them in rentals and apartments, and then single family, townhomes, and cottages and twin homes, a little bit of everything to try and kind of soak up that market that needs those things. So we'll have home ownership and rentals. Any questions?
No, thanks, you guys, you girls, for all that you do. It's so exciting.
That's it is. It's very exciting. Finally.
I actually would love, after the public hearing, I have a couple questions. I'd love to just learn a little bit more about the status of the project. If you'd be open to
Absolutely.
Okay, so.
And
it
a tour,
is-
if anybody wants a tour.
And a tour. It's so exciting to drive by every time.
I know.
It is, it's 4:42, so I will open up our public hearing. Is there anybody, like nobody is on the Zoom? And is there anyone here who wanted to make a comment? Were you here to make a comment or just listen in?
I'm just listening in, but I was trying to get in on the changes for the Royal Crossing, and I guess I'm a little bit late.
Oh, no, this is about Arroyo Crossing.
Yeah, but I don't know what have you already discussed with what the changes are?
Because you're in that
That's
neighborhood, right, Karen?
Pardon?
You live right there in that
Yeah, I mean, I
neighborhood,
walk
so,
through almost every
yeah,
night.
yeah.
Really, we're just changing it. I can talk to you about it later too.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, if you don't mind, just like a quick overview. I know, I will say, I talked to a number of people in the public who are really excited about this when you talk to them about it and aren't aware about it, or they know it as, oh, that development out by Resource Boulevard. If you don't mind, just like taking a minute or two just to overview the changes, or in general, the update, I think that'd be great.
Okay, sure. So these, the townhomes and the little tan guys, not the brown ones, those are apartments, the little tan ones. You
I
have.
think
gonna.
Elisa will
have
show
it
it
on
on
screen.
screen.
Karen, do you wanna-
Yeah, come on up,
I've
Karen.
got a map.
Okay.
So all that's happening is you can see we have little lot lines. You see all the little lines that delineate each house's lot. Well, when we went through the whole process, those ended up just showing up as tracks and not lot lines. So we had to go back and draw the lot lines. And then when we were defining them, we defined multifamily and single family in terms of setbacks and how many and all that, but we did not define townhomes and twin homes setbacks and how many. So we were going back to clarify those, clarify what's already on here. Nothing here has changed. We just clarified lot lines and how many.
Right, so yeah, that's a really key point, is that density is not changing at
Nothing's
all, it's just defining the housing typology better, so. Fantastic.
I will say in the end, because of how these lot lines did lay out in our dream plan, that I think we'll probably lose one townhome to make them all fit like we had planned. But out of 300, I think so far we're doing okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'll talk to you.
I'm happy. Any other questions?
Did you have a comment to make during the public hearing?
No, I just go through there almost every day, walking and looking. My only concern was the 2-story buildings. Instead, I thought they're all gonna be 1 story. That's my disappointment there.
Yeah, that's a housing authority. Went 2-story to get the square footage they needed for their family units.
And it looked like, I thought those were gonna be townhomes, but I guess not.
The townhomes will also be 2-story. And they'll be, but as we have them designed, they're along Spanish Valley Drive. On both sides of Spanish Valley Drive is where the townhomes are. Now, the apartments will also be a couple stories.
No, I think probably 2 or 3, yeah, but yeah.
These LIHTC ones, are these gonna be?
So these are over.
Yeah, two-story, okay. But bring on the apartments, we really got.
We're working hard, but they're expensive to build.
Especially right now, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so if there's no additional public comments, we will close the public hearing. And thank you both for your update and for giving a little bit of an overview that kind of captured some of the questions. I will say, I think anything you could do to get the word out in the public, I just wanted to let you know as this was coming up, I talked to a number of folks who weren't aware it was called Royal Crossing, and that's what we meant. And that once they hear it, they get so excited about the project. So
And thank you. And we haven't done a lot of that just because we're putting so many pieces together. I mean, by the time you take USDA and the county regs and take everything and try and make them all fit into a puzzle, it's been quite challenging the last year and a half. So I think now we kind of have those pieces together, and yes, we will expand our website and get some news out there.
so excited.
Get going. So
Thank you so much. Thanks, ladies. All right. So with that, we'll open up discussion. Quick reminder, since we have a new member, we try to hold substantive discussions such as whether or not we would vote for this or why we would or wouldn't until there is a motion on the table. If you want to talk about something substantive, the person who makes the motion has the first opportunity for discussion. You don't have to vote for your first motion, but it does allow us to just follow Robert's rules. So with that, if there's any questions for clarification to staff or even to the applicant, now's your time. Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion.
I will motion. I move to send a favorable recommendation to the county commission to adopt the ordinance approving the amended planned unit development master plan for real property within the Arroyo Crossing PUD, which will clarify housing types within the development and also add setback requirements for the townhome housing type.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table by McKetta, seconded by OB. Any discussion? McKetta, you're welcome to open the floor.
I'd only say that this just seems minor clarification of things. Things such as duplexes versus townhouses, where the ownership line should be. So I think this is an improvement. And I'm impressed. Of course, there's no extra density. Although with affordable housing, I'd almost like to see it.
Right, any other comments? Steve, you good? Go. I just wanted to make sure since you're our remote participant. So if there's no further discussion, I will call the question. Again, this is a motion by McKetta, seconded by OB. Send a favorable recommendation to the county commission to adopt the ordinance approving the amended PUD master plan for real property within the Arroyo Crossing PUD, which will clarify housing types within the development and add setback requirements for townhome housing type. All in favor of this motion, raise your hand or say aye. Seeing none opposed, that motion passes with one absent. Wonderful. We are very excited to see, well, I'm very excited, I should say, to see that go forward. All right, we will move on to our county commission update.
Okay, I will try to go really quickly. So our meeting last week, a few things that I think will be of interest to you. So we had a presentation by State Fire and Lands and Rim to Rim Restoration, just talking about fuels mitigation in the creeks, and specifically like building fire breaks, which is really relevant in the fact that we just had that fire so close to the creek that was only probably what, a half a mile from the Cinema Courts fire recently, so so that's great. They're constantly working. The Chris Kaufman gave a report on our tax collection, and it's the highest that he has seen. So 97.3%, and what that means for just common taxpayers is it lowers our tax rate a little bit, saves about $70,000. I think we'll all find this exciting. They have begun the engineering on the bike path, the Spanish Valley bike path, and they hope to start construction in the fall out to Beeman.
Out to
So,
Beaman.
out to Beaman. So
Yeah.
that's really
So
exciting. Really
Wow.
exciting. Chris is working super hard on, what am I talking about, right of ways and all of that. So that's pretty exciting. It'll basically be a 10-foot bike path with a 5-foot buffer. I mean, I think Arroyo Crossing is a really good example of what it will look like, right?
Already there.
So that's pretty
I was out on my
exciting.
morning walk this morning, having to deal with traffic
I
and the
know,
GoTos.
it's
Well, not
so
GoTos yet.
exciting.
I'm thrilled. That's
I mean, it's really exciting. This last weekend I was in Sun Valley, and when you're in communities like that, that have bike paths that run 30 miles, and then you're like, wow, it's a really big deal.
Yeah.
Right, and it moves a lot of people, so,
good for the kids too.
um,
Yeah, it's great for everyone, absolutely.
yeah,
Fantastic.
it's quite exciting. I should just stop there. We appointed Aaron Lambert to the planning commission, so that was great, exciting. And then we just had 3 public hearings, the 10 roof overnight accommodation. There was a lot of discussion about that. Yeah, I don't really know what to say about that.
We
Kevin-
started the discussion, but they postponed the actual decision till the next meeting.
Right.
So I think Kevin was trying to make sure that we didn't get too far along in the discussion.
Yeah, I got in the weeds, and Mary
Oh,
put the smack down on me. Yeah, I like that. I'm good with that. I got in the weeds. I won't vote on that because Jick is a really good friend of mine. But they were really concerned again about water, as always, and fuel, fires in that area. And so I think it really got those guys thinking about those couple things a little more, even though I had said that was really important for them to think about that. I don't know if they took that seriously. So hopefully now they will. And then the Thompson Springs, would that be a rezone? Yep. And again, discussion about water. And then lastly, the Kings Creek Preservation and Development. So, and there was crickets on that discussion.
Right. I think there was some tabling possibly, or no?
It just was crickets. It
Yeah.
was like, okay, we have public hearing open.
Oh,
and that
because
was
it's
it.
open.
Right,
Yeah,
it's just
They're
open.
gonna make the
So,
decision.
that was it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have some public hearings open
Yeah.
and people can watch the recording on YouTube if they
Yes.
want some additional content.
Yep, because those couple of
Overnight.
those discussions went on for quite a long time.
Okay,
That's it.
exciting opportunities to get involved.
But yes, the Spanish, it's really great.
Would you explain the tax surface, or do we know anything more
No,
about?
just
where-
tax collection
tax-
rate. And he said it was predominantly due to Union Pacific, that they were
Okay.
actually paying their taxes.
Okay,
Yeah,
so this is 97% of taxes that should have been paid were paid.
yes,
Gotcha. Thank
exactly,
you.
yes.
Okay.
right.
But that gave
People are
us,
paying their taxes.
What is the standard been in the past? You know?
Well, the standard rate of collection, is that what you?
Yeah.
Hey, he did have that.
Okay, but
I don't know if you
No,
remember.
no.
Do you remember, Sophia? I'm
I
like,
know it was like 86%
That's
back in the
what I
day.
thought.
Usually
Oh,
it's
okay.
just steadily-
Yeah,
huh?
yeah, that's right. I was just,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
I thought maybe you'd remember too. I'm like, he had a graph, but it was going that direction. Not
better,
that.
better than the
Yeah,
alternative.
right. So
Up
that's
and to the
exciting.
right.
That's about it. You're welcome.
Any questions for Trish?
That's kind of an adjacent question.
Yeah.
What are the rules on planning commissioners commenting on public comment?
Oh,
or
you can
things?
comment. So generally, when I comment and clarify that I'm commenting as an individual.
Sure.
If there is
Yeah.
interest, occasionally when there is an issue that the planning commission made a recommendation on and then wanted to reaffirm or add additional clarity, occasionally the planning commission has voted in favor of crafting a letter. That does require majority support to craft a letter and majority support to send the letter, and then the signees would sign it. So just that is, I don't know if that's something you want to do, but that is.
Right,
always
but just
something-
as a resident, you can.
As a
Right,
resident, you
love
can
it.
comment
Right.
on county issues as well as city, planning commission, city.
Great.
City council. Thank you.
And like the Cane Springs Preservation and Development, is that the name? I remember, yes,
Yeah.
because it's an interesting name,
Mm-hmm.
Preservation and Development. I think it was simply, and tell me if I'm right, it was just,
Petition for a special service district.
right,
Which,
because they can't, they have to provide their own
Yeah.
services.
It just reminded me, I've been asked that question about county commission.
Yeah.
hearings. So that's great.
That's it.
Does the county have a list of open hearings available on Grand County Connects?
I don't know if it's on, I don't think we have that on Grand County Connects, but that's a good idea.
Yeah, that is a good idea.
We have like a news flash page on our website, on the Grand County website, that has public hearing notices like that. but,
Even a
Yeah.
2 or 3 sentence summary, link to the packets, planning commission recommendation where it exists would be good. It's just a lot.
Yeah.
I know I get overwhelmed by everything happening in the county, and I know people who are as close to the issues can feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, that would be a good place to have it, for sure.
I would just say one quick aside, and it's really gone nowhere, so I'll state that, is with the loss of those trailers in Pack Creek, I was thinking about these 2 developments in town of these trailer parks that are being, they've been evicted and they're sitting there. So I just kind of threw that out to Carly and Mallory, like, is there any possibility of moving some of those trailers out there? But I know there's probably a lot that goes into that, as far I know, right? As far as, but my understanding is these ones over here by the school district office are they're old, but they're pretty good shape,
It'd be great if, I'm sure the county would do this,
Be
would
nice.
waive any hookup fees
Right.
or anything to
Right. Be nice to repurpose some of that stuff, even if it was just temporarily. So anyways.
Please. Further discussion. We will move on to a number of items we're just discussing today, beginning with the future land use descriptions, which were included. We should all have a link to the Google Doc, which we'll look at tonight on the red lines.
Oh, you want me to bring up the Google Doc
Yeah,
version?
let's bring it. I know I left some comments. I don't know if anybody else left any comments.
Got to leave comments, I have comments, so.
Okay, perfect. And it is a little before 5. Let's, what we'll try to do is keep this to no more than 30 minutes, and then we'll have citizens to be heard at 5:30 again.
Okay, almost there, you guys.
And I guess you guys all know now that John is leaving.
You know, I did, and I was gonna wait till future considerations to say, and I felt so bad.
Sorry.
John, I'd like you to know, I wrote you a very, very nice email saying how much you were gonna miss you, and apparently sent it to an email that you weren't CC'd on. So.
See there?
I send it to where?
I replied to an email that said that you weren't on anymore, and I thought you were on it, so it will come your way after the meeting.
Oh, okay.
He's going to live the good life in Spain.
Oh my God.
Well, we'll celebrate John. We'll come back to celebrating John as the final hurrah this evening.
We'll be waiting our invitation to visit.
I know,
Right.
Offsite.
Yeah, little field trip, yeah.
Field trip. So why don't we go, not, section by section, if there's any comments, and redline it collectively or have any discussion? Would you want to give just a really quick overview of how these were formed and how these are meant to be applied, that they're strategic or practical?
Right, yeah. So the future land use descriptions, this is like the very first draft of these that came back from the consultant. So they're definitely up for discussion and fine tuning and really just, it's kind of a starting point. So these are meant to be applied to the future land use map, which we actually got a version of that just today. I wasn't able to put it into the packet, but we'll share that next time. But yeah, so these all apply to, they either have at least one zoning district that exists right now in the description. So they're meant to apply to the actual zoning districts on the map, and some of them, there's more than one zoning district in the land use description. So, yeah, and I haven't even really, I've gone through these a little bit, but kind of just probably as much as you all have. Because we're doing a lot of other things at the same time. But
so why don't we just go through each, call out any If there's any debates or if there's any concerns about changing language, we'll use our time for that. But I think most important is giving staff direction, feedback, or raising any questions or clarifications that we'll need. And is the goal to adopt these in our next meeting or just to
I
send them
think,
straight to county commission?
I think they're gonna probably be, I think we're gonna wanna wait and have them go with the map, or like as a package, so.
So there are 4 residential zones suggested in here. Let's begin with rural residential, which is probably the easiest one we'll have on this list since it aligns to an existing underlying zone. Any comments or notes, questions, directions to staff? Okay, I'm going to move us through quickly, but if I go too fast, someone call me out and we'll back up. So low density residential. First, has everyone had a chance to review this? I know it was in the packet, but we're good. Okay.
I have a question on what we're commenting on, if it's just the descriptions or it's things we want to elaborate within the descriptions about what zoning ought to look like. Because if it's just the description, I don't have a lot of questions. But if it's, do we have an existing zone that actually reflects what's said in some of these, I probably have some questions. So.
Right, so down at the, in each little paragraph down at the bottom here is what the consultant had identified as the corresponding zone that would apply to that. So yeah, if there's a question of like whether that fits in your mind or if it's needs to change or, yeah, we could talk about that for sure. Obviously, this will be much more of a discussion when we actually see a map and see these things laying out on the ground. So I think
This is all just like a primer for us.
yes, exactly.
That means I get to hold my fire for a while.
To let it stew.
The question I had on these guys is like, one thing I'm kind of new here, so all right, we're on some of these things, on rural residential, I know like the minimum acreage for like a septic tank is like an acre. And like, I see like things like they're creating this special service district, out on Cane Creek. So like, how, like, these guys prepared this report and are they aware of like, do you have to do a mini sewer system out there if they want to develop, like, what happens if they wanted to do some kind of like, it's close to town, like higher density thing, if they build their own sewer system, that's kind of thing, like, what are our obligations to be like, counties, if we declare this area like, medium density, do we have to like, does that put us in the position of having to offer services
I
to it?
think what you're speaking to is the level of service.
Yeah.
For these corresponding land use descriptions. And so that we did have the consultant look at that and there are references to levels of service in each of these. So level of service 1 or 2 is in low density residential and rural residential, and then it goes up from there. But those might need to be tweaked as well.
Yeah, I just don't see any like, water or sewer.
So
in
it's all
those.
through, mainly, we require, groundwater and sewer to provide a will serve, and say that they will serve a development. Otherwise, they are there, if they're doing a subdivision, usually we require them to prove that they can put in a septic, that there is the right kind of land and it's not going to affect the aquifer and all of that. So it's built into our code to already be looking at that for sure. With the King Springs development, they've been talking to WISA and they've also been talking to the county and trying to figure out what to do out there because they do need to provide their own system.
Okay, so it's kind of baked into this.
Yeah.
Okay, that's okay.
Can I jump in here, Emily, and just say a couple of, Emily's the chair, of course, and if you don't mind,
One
Elisa.
second. Did you want to add anything there, or do you want?
I had an additional question, so I'll wait.
Okay, great. Go ahead, John.
So there's a couple things missing here. One of them is the map, as Elisa mentioned. And they do describe various areas of the county, which will then tie in to the land use code. The other thing that's missing is a graphic that will actually link these are high level performance statements that are linked to levels of service, as was just mentioned, as Elisa just mentioned and Aaron questioned. So those graphics will actually give you a building form, a building orientation, and some development standards with them too. The goal here is not to get on the ground too quickly with a land use description, because it's really meant to be high level. But at the same time, provide a good development pattern. When I say good, something the community can accept in the long range over 20 years, which would potentially extend services in some areas. So if that makes any sense, a graphic that actually represents the ground-oriented references and how the building forms would fit the landforms in the general plan, and then that would link to the new land use code. And then the other thing that's missing is the level of service maps that actually show the current levels of service. Levels of service 1 is sewer, water, stormwater management, no very, very low impacts on floodplain, no impacts with steep slopes, aquifer protection. I think Elisa mentioned that. Level of service 2 is roads and potentially just water. And then level of service 3 is just roads. So that mapping process would be not only what's current, but what's future for the next 20 years. So, and then you could overlay the land use over top of the levels of service and the constraints map and get a fairly good indication of where development patterns could develop over time. And then the next step, of course, would be to look at the zoning map. I'm trying to make this too complicated. And the zoning map would actually show you what is permitted as far as development rights are concerned. And then the other thing that Elisa's been working on is actually the ground truthing part. That is, what do the current development patterns show? And then you can see the gap between what's current, what's on the ground, what's zoned, and what the long range land use is. And hopefully that helps.
Any follow-ups?
Okay, I'm really hesitant to ask this question. I feel like this might be a stupid question. but-
Really quick, can everyone hear Makeda when she speaks? Yeah, okay.
So this is where it's talking about the application or the implementation zones. Are we renaming these implementation zones, like land use is being renamed? Like instead of it being large lot residential, it's now going to be medium density residential?
That's kind of the idea, but that would be for the future land use map, not our zoning map. So
Right.
our zoning districts, as they exist currently.
Right.
Are,
So instead of having them both be the same, it's going to be like just on the map, it's going to have this
you know,
description. and
that
the
is a
other
really
one's gonna
good
have-
question. I don't know if that would come to that point.
Okay, cool.
Figuring
No,
that
no,
out
that's
yet.
great. I just wanted,
Yeah.
that's what I wasn't there. Okay, cool. Well, keep it on.
It would seem to me like it would be a bad idea. I mean, I always look at the future land use map as telling us kind of what zone it is. Otherwise,
Right.
we'd have to decide.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think they
That's-
should match up.
That's my reservation.
What I
That was
think.
what I was gonna bring up.
Yeah.
With the consistency and naming.
And that kind of speaks to the comment I left here on medium density, which is more high density is when it's an overlay, you feel like you have more control. Residents feel like they have more awareness of when that's going to possibly affect them. High density residential as an underlying zone for any number of reasons carries with it a lot of baggage in this community. And I think people often think of high density in terms of what they see in larger cities and not what high density could look like here. And as wonderful it is to think that we would have these form elements people could reference, the reality is human beings react to words and not in-depth research, which is so. I don't require any further discussion to make me feel comfortable other than just to share that to the extent we can adopt existing nomenclature to clarify it.
Right, like
or-
multifamily residential sounds less scary than high density.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about this, and I do appreciate it, is that it's focusing more on the use and like multifamily housing, multifamily residential is a very strict land use designation. High density residential, to me, inspires more non-vehicular oriented neighborhood patterns where kids can get out and run over to the neighbor's house and, you know, but I want to be mindful that the words we choose should be intentional.
Yes.
So that's all I wanted to just, it sounds like there's some kind of general consensus that maybe our naming needs a little bit of a second pass, and certainly some comment from the public around how they react to those words before we adopt.
Well, and that, I mean, this, it's interesting, I guess, range and grazing, I think currently is in residential. So I think but, and yet here it's put down kind of at the bottom, away from the residential things. And in some ways, I'll get to this eventually, but in some ways, I think this is where it belongs. I don't think it's really residential, although you might be able to put a house, you are able to put a house on your range and grazing place. So I like this classification here, but I also like putting it logically together.
Sure, yeah, okay, that's good.
It's almost like we have the rural residential, large lot residential, and then sort of transitional residential or something to that
Right.
end that really starts to capture those interfaces between residential areas and commercial or mixed use zones. Which I think that itself isn't super specific, but at least implies really what this definition is meant to say. Yes, absolutely. Steve, before we move on, anything you wanted to add? I don't want to miss you from the conversation.
Yeah, I have a question for staff, and I think this probably relates maybe to what Makeda was asking. Well, I guess I'm still just trying to wrap my head around what this future land use is really going to, like, what is its function going to really be? So if we use an example, let's say I have a lot that is currently zoned as large lot residential. Let's just say I'm a landowner who has some concerns that says, oh, you're changing the land use. What does this mean for me?
Well, in my, a simple way of just to, because I almost want to jump to a conclusion that maybe you're not making, but that there would never be, I don't think there would ever be a moment in this exercise where this intention, where the future land use map designation would be like a down zoning kind of thing. If anything, it would remain the status quo, or it would be an up zone. It would either go to higher density residential or some other type of commercial, like neighborhood commercial, when we talk about those nodes. So we're kind of talking about moving things forward in terms of development, not necessarily, I don't think we would be going to like a, say, a small lot residential existing zone and say, and overlaying on their future land use of rural residential. I don't think we would be going backwards in that sense. I mean, maybe there would be some minor cases where that would happen.
I want to clarify, I don't agree or disagree in terms of implementation, because I fully understand what our next step would be or what we want it to be. But I do want to distinguish between the underlying zone and the applicable uses within that zone are related, but there have already been cases where we have removed uses from underlying zones and either placed them in other zones or remove them altogether and adopted overlay zones instead.
True, yeah, that's true.
And we may find for some of these in this exercise, it may make sense to see certain uses apportioned to different zones based around the long-term planning and priorities of the community. So I don't, and Steve, this is not directed to you explicitly. This is, I think, a broader misconception that comes up often. around planning, which is the idea that because something is allowable in a zone today, that it is something that the community is always and forever accepting as a use in that zone. If something has been built or vested within that zone, then should something change, it would become a legal non-conforming use or non-conforming use. And we've seen that with some of the overnight accommodations in our county that don't sit under an overlay.
Right.
So I think what you're getting at, if I understand, Steve, is like how we implement this. And I think that is, it's probably really important to get to that as soon as possible, even if the details are massaged, because the public will react to. I would hate for the conversation to rotate around misconceptions of implementation versus discussion of vision and priorities, if that makes sense. So the sooner we can adopt a path forward and find examples of that working well in other communities, the better off we serve the public. That's my opinion, but it sounds like maybe there's consensus around getting to a stronger understanding as soon as possible of what comes next. Fair?
Yeah,
I mean, I'll probably bring up an example or two in our conversation today. One will be eventually, there's kind of environmental protection that we have real down at the bottom. Castle Valley doesn't have any protection from the county. Interesting, the sole source aquifer here on this side has protection. The down, kind of, you might call it down zone, there's some protection about how dense you can have stuff. It's not out there in Castle Valley. I don't know why, although I understand we can't get state protection because we don't actually run the water through pipes to people's houses. But we've got a sole source aquifer that is our only aquifer, and I'm going to argue for protection of it. And we might get turned down, but it might be looked at as, well, people can't do just the same thing they were planning to do with their property.
I think a good recent example we can look at, because honestly at this point I've forgotten the details, is the small area plan. Because one of the things we identified was, so there have been two underlying zone types. There was resort special, and then there was like resort commercial. And in a older northern corridor planning study, the land north of the bridge and south of Arches was designated for future land use in resort commercial. And then what we did was we consolidated that with resort special as the proposed zone that would represent any future development. So if somebody had resort commercial, it doesn't go away. But if somebody were to petition the county for an upzone from rural residential to something else, that would be the zone that they would petition for, not resort commercial. So it's a very explicit example, but that's, I think, more in line with what it is that we are targeting. It's just the breadth of this overwhelms me.
right.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think it'll feel a lot more, well, it'll just make more sense when we have the actual map to look at. And like John said, these are just sort of the high level kind of descriptions that we want to be thinking about, and certainly change them up, but in your mind, you can kind of be thinking about where they might go on a map, but I think it's really more about, would we want to even see, any of this, or if there's something that sticks out in your mind that wouldn't fit.
John, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, Emily, if I could just add one more thing here. Remember, the OC, or the general plan, is a comprehensive planning document. Land use is the backbone of a great comprehensive plan. It doesn't matter if you look at some of the best comprehensive plans out there, maybe Park City or Flagstaff, Sedona. They all reference the land use descriptions in terms of good, strong policy in all areas, including sustainability, transportation, infrastructure, public safety. Those policies have to work together for the land use to work well. And so those are long range, but they're also very fundamental to making sure the plan is fundamentally comprehensive.
I realize this isn't the appropriate thinking, but it almost thinks of these as overlays on top of our underlying zone. Is that
Kind of,
an
yes.
acceptable metaphor?
Yes, for sure, because, yeah, I mean, that's how, what we're talking about with individual rezoning applications coming forward. Once this is adopted, then this will guide those decisions going forward each time somebody comes with a rezone application.
No, we did that with the scenic resource overlay on
Right.
top of underlying zones with different development standards.
Yeah, so every time we have a rezone lately, that's, they're trying to go from, say, like Thompson, that was the most recent one. I always, in the staff report, reference our current future land use designations from 2012. And those are somewhat helpful, because that was the vision at the time, but now we're updating those. So
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and just run through this document. If there are any comments that are additional questions, things we saw sort of generally missing, like, for example, we sort of called this out below and I made a note there as well, but we don't have the concept of any rail transit industrial. We have only airport. I don't know if there's any interest in adding that to clarify.
I would think so, in the sense that we now have, Rocky Mountaineer and.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I also noticed under light medium industrial, we say light industrial can be compatible with residential uses, either internal or external mixed use. In the residential section, we do talk about buffers or transition zones or something to that effect. And I thought it might be worth just calling out the general spectrum of that, or shape of how we would, what would transition look like? Or what would it generally be defined by? Yeah, that's a good point. Before I continue, any additional comments in these areas? Heavy industrial, any comments? Public and institutional. University district, I just called out. Does, in this general definition, would this include student housing, or would we expect that in high density housing? And how do we consider buffer zones and transitional development there? Any additional comments? Parks, trails, and open space. Maybe Obi, you could actually give some additional color here as well. We've had issues, we've had confusion where people have submitted an application and referenced open space in the application, which the community generally has interpreted to mean public space when the two are different. And I think it's worth specifying and possibly even separating open space as more sort of conservation type easements as opposed to public spaces, which are parks and trails in my mind. And I know that's been a consistent issue, especially with regards to PUDs. Did you want to, I know you've just been on.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah. So active open space being parks and trails, and passive open space is more of a conservation minded open space where it's just remaining wild in its own state.
Or even public space and open space.
Which is, I think, a good distinction. I mean, the one that was going to be up by the golf course, to the extent that they would have dedicated the trail, that would be public space, and then there might have been some open space that they didn't want people on.
Yeah, okay, sure. I see.
It'd
So
be
it could
nice
still
to
be like
distinguish.
in a natural state, but
Not
not
accessible.
accessible.
Yeah, because I know like in our land use specifications for overnight accommodations, for example, we talk about public interest as a trade-off for bringing forth development applications. And we've seen applications that speak to open space, but the idea is not, public access and usage. It's just, oh, we're saving some space, which I think is worth, for clarity, distinguishing. Range and resource, any comments? Lee?
So that's where, this actually, your description got me to thinking where it starts, it's not your description,
Right.
the description of these folks. The range and resource designation includes, that doesn't mean it's all, ranging resource lands such as agricultural, livestock, and natural resource extraction. And then the one example given is range and grazing. I think there's actually a lot of land that in the county that fits this first kind of sentence that may not be appropriate for a density of one house for 5 acres. Now, and also, I have to be clear here, it also is that there's some Sidla land, right, that they're thinking of developing. I'll just make it up, 300 acres. One house per 5 acres, that's 60 houses. I never remember, that's something like 150 people, will say, on that land in a watershed that we're of course trying to close. And is that the appropriate thing of much of our land? I wish Tony were here, this kind of thing of, well, if you got 50 acres here, 160 acres here, do we want those things developed to the density of Castle Valley? So Castle Valley does not look like a rural area or an agricultural area. People do agriculture there, but they do it on two acres of their land. So I think the question there is, should there be a different zone for
that's
much of the
interesting.
land in the county? Now, that's politically difficult, but I would raise the issue that this is what they do in Oregon. They try to protect their agricultural land, and they will have some areas where it might take 160 acres to have a house on it.
Right.
So I'd bring that issue up. As I read this, I do think it was good to take range and resource. That is, this range and grazing thing is not really a residential thing. It means that somebody should be able to put a house
Right.
on their property.
Yeah.
But not necessarily subdivided into 20, 30, 40 houses. So
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I was just thinking, for some reason, to me, the Division of Wildlife comes up in the fact that they incentivize private landowners to harbor wildlife, but it's like 100 acres of cropland and or a full section, 640 acres of range, right? So I'm sure there's a bajillion examples out there of what is considered true agricultural. I mean, I shouldn't, but when I have a chicken coop, like I'm raising animals, but I'm not a producer, right? So, yeah, that's a great comment.
I noticed when we get into these definitions, we've lost our reference to level of service. And to me, this is an area where we talked about fire risk, emergency services. An area that speaks to me where this would be appropriate is the area of the Bookless, where getting emergency services in the case of denser residential development would be very difficult, and the denser the residential development, the higher risk of or higher demand on those services. So maybe this is an area where we need to add a specification of, level of service 3 beyond 3, that is, minimal county road maintenance and basically no services. And then use that to say, well, what is the maximum acceptable density where having no services would be appropriate for residential use? So it probably is worth looking at state code and looking at other areas in the state as well as in surrounding states before we take this conversation much further, because I'm sure there are limits, but I think it's the right direction to maybe break out. Yeah, and continue the
5
conversation.
acres minimum is pretty small compared to a lot of places where we're talking about just different examples all over that I could think of just off the top of my head, where the minimum lot size is really like 40 acres when it comes to a resource designation like that.
this is also an area, a place where it may make sense to maintain this, and rather than maintain the use, but consider dropping the density and then using an overlay in the transitional zones closer to development areas where we increase density and provide a heightened level of services, so that it's sort of in line with that transitional and continuous planning.
It seemed like you were really hesitant to like take things away, right? You were like, this would like go forward, and
I'm thinking, I'm sorry, I probably was thinking more in terms of our valley specifically.
yeah, so
So when
I just
we
see
go
us
out
going in
into
two
the-
directions, like you're like trying to restrict things, and you're trying to be like,
Well, yeah, and I think there's something to be said about the future land use designation taking density away.
yeah,
It's not taking it away, it's proposing something that's less density, but that you would have to have a very, very compelling reason, I think, even to do that in a general plan. It's, I don't think I would have to do some research, but I don't know how it would go towards the issues of taking, it's not that, because we're not rezoning it. We're putting it as a future land use designation, but still.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's an interesting thing, this thing of restricting or not restricting. That is, there are many of us that think that the density belongs in the urban area
Yeah.
most.
Yeah.
And as we move away from the urban area, it doesn't belong. So you might find me on some issues saying, maybe we should move the density a little bit higher here, but when we get out in this vast county where, most of the land, of course, is federal, state, civil kind of land, but the lands that we have that are outside of this valley probably shouldn't share the same density.
right, yeah, of
So
course.
that's all.
Right.
Yeah.
I do want to
Well,
just clarify that thing about planning that starts to become delicate is that until something is developed or invested or applied for, it's not that we are taking something away, it's that the standards for that area are revised to represent the community's resources, the county's resources, and broad county vision and strategy. So, for example, due to the drying out of our soils and our tinder of our forests, the cost to service more remote parts of our community has gone up significantly. And so it may be in the county's broader interest to maintain lower tax rates by decreasing the potential burden on county funds by servicing more rural parts of the county. And we may find that the most appropriate policy way to go about that is to revise the development standards of certain zones or areas in the county. So it's all about trade-offs. And, I think this is where it may be worth considering development standards or density within some of those outlying areas of the county, which, keep in mind, is not where development is happening. And to the extent it is, it's happening most frequently because people are requesting up zoning. It may be worth considering dropping that and then allowing for overlays that can increase density, so that in places where people do want to, build a small residential development for themselves and their family, for example, the county can accommodate it. It's not the county saying we won't let you. It's saying, how do we balance? And this comes down to that. How do we balance the public cost of servicing roads, putting out fires, providing, water and so on with the individual parcel. And it's, we're all just members of the community here volunteering on this board. Like, it's really hard to manage that, but I think it's important we talk with the community in those terms, because that's really what we're discussing is, hey, we can continue to allow development into the outskirts of our county, but with the cost of gas, it might mean that there's a higher price we're all paying to accommodate that. And as a community, are we on board with that? So I don't mean to go on too much of the soapbox, but I just want to make sure we're talking about it in terms of like planning. Is that fair?
Yes.
Is there anything? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry for the, thank you for coming to my TED.
And there are other tools that could be at play here, because what keeps coming up in my mind is like the transfer of development, or transfer of density kind of development rights transfer program. which could be and something to think about if we want to talk about reducing density somewhere and upping it in another part of the county. There's things to look into. But
Yeah, I don't think we're talking about any implementation specifics, but.
Right.
Anything anyone wants to add here? Viewshed overlays, I only point out that I believe we have multiple proposed, so we may want to enumerate those.
And then
We'll come back to the public. We normally finish the topic and then go to public comment. So Steve, we'll do that as soon as we wrap this up. Thank you for calling that out though.
And before, and I've already raised the issue of the environmental sensitive areas, I'd like to suggest that there are some in the watershed of Castle Valley that we might think about, given it played a key role in the golf course area.
Yes, I agree. That's exactly what came to my mind.
OAL, any comments? This is a rewrite. We had some discussion at our last meeting. Let's go down to the designation character table.
And maybe before we jump into the designation character, just since we passed up the overlays, Lisa, maybe could you speak to your decision-making process to leave off the high density housing overlay? Is that kind of embedded then into the that new element, the high density residential?
I think that was the idea, Steve, is that the consultants were kind of gonna put that idea out there as a proposition for everybody to consider, is to try to do away with our overlay zones if we can and embed them into our actual zoning. Really like take the time to figure out where would we want to see high density and actually in a very planned way, and then go with it instead of kind of, I don't know, leaving it as an overlay. But that's definitely something to discuss. So.
And maybe that just kind of segues into just my overall comments on this, and I'll just take just a moment. I look at all of these descriptions and these categories, and I think they all look pretty good. I think for me, I'll just be waiting to see, kind of the devil's in the details to see, what are units per acre for each of these, especially in the residential zones. So that's why I don't have much to say. I think looking at a lot of this stuff, I'm intrigued. I like where it's going. I really want to see kind of the next step in terms of the actual numbers for, like I was saying, per units or units per acre, and then also the map. So I'm sure I'll have more to say later, but yeah, just wanted to share that.
All right. See my comment here. Just more terminology. Any additional comments that we haven't addressed yet? Do you need any clarification from the planning commission?
No, not at this point. It's just so preliminary.
I know.
Yeah, we didn't have time to really dig into it, but we wanted to share it with you guys and just kind of get the discussion going. So.
Do we feel comfortable moving on? All right.
So you're gonna, I'm sorry, you're gonna develop this a little bit. When I got my packet, I didn't see this part. Sorry.
Okay, yeah.
This is.
This is just kind of from the consultant draft stage, and it will correspond to a map, a bunch of maps that they're putting together. And eventually it will form the future land use map. It
Okay.
is the land use chapter in the general plan.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
We're gonna see this again.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this
for
is
sure.
good.
Yeah, and you guys can all come and make comments on this, as much as you want to provide your feedback, then we can give that to the consultant and we can work with them and modifying it.
And Elisa, was it SJ or SCJ, the
Mhm.
consultant?
Yeah,
Where
that's
is this the one out of San Francisco?
No, Spokane. This is the one we've been using all along for the land use analysis.
Okay.
Bill Grimes. Yeah.
Oh, Bill Grimes. Okay, sorry. We have so many consultants on different projects. I can't keep.
I know.
So
Come on,
this
Steve,
is up online,
keep
so-
it in line.
Yes, yeah. I believe I sent the email with the link in it, but I could,
And just a reminder, we do have the original presentation by Bill in recorded and slides, thank you, that form. So if anyone needed a refresher of kind of what this was driving towards. Sure. All right, it is 5:41, so this will be an opportunity for a second citizens to be heard. I do notice, Crystal, you joined us. You don't have to speak if you're just here to listen in, but if you would like to make a comment on the record, this is your opportunity to come off mute and do so. All right. Perfect. Well, we'll go ahead then and move on.
I have a question. I just have a general question.
Yes.
So I was looking at the minutes on May 23rd under discussion items. And there was an item listed on approval of Plateau Estates subdivision, but I haven't seen anything else on that.
So my memory, is that the one Kevin Gerber? I think he just took a couple of acres. Am I wrong on this?
yeah, it was a minor
That,
subdivision.
it was a
It's
minor.
I know, it's next door to me, but I was
Yeah,
like,
so
well, I
it
want
was
to
a-
know what the status.
It was
It
approved.
was approved.
It was
Yeah,
approved?
it went through the county commission.
It met
Yeah.
all the standards of our.
Okay,
land
yeah,
use code.
because his wife doesn't know that. She doesn't have any update as far as.
Oh, no, we talked to her today. Jenna, you spoke with her on the phone. Yeah. she knows.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because when I texted her.
Yeah, it was just
Yesterday,
approved
she had
last Tuesday
Yeah,
at
it
the
was-
commission. I think so.
It was at the last commission. meeting.
All right, that's good. All right, thank you.
Sam, I noticed you joined us as well. If you're just calling to listen in, that's great. If you'd like to make a comment, you're welcome to come off of mute.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, Planning Commission. It's good to see you all, and thank you for having this discussion. I want to speak in regards to item 5 on today's agenda, which is taking a second look at permitting for temporary housing. I first came to Moab as a guide, and I lived spring and falls in a parking lot that was owned by the guiding company. It was a comfortable place. We had access to a bathroom and a kitchen and endless food that didn't get eaten on trips. But there was always kind of a specter of getting in trouble, of being asked to leave based off of how visible we were from the road, depending on our relationships with the neighbors. There were all sorts of factors that really made the situation feel tenuous, and thereby made employment in that company and with all guiding companies here in town feel a little less certain. So I really appreciate having this conversation about it, since my guiding career is largely over and I live in a house now, and that's not always easy either. But I'm really glad to see this conversation happening to figure out ways that people who might not live here year round have a way to be here in a dignified and more permanent manner. And I would like to echo comments that I've heard in the last few meetings that we can't let this end goal of perfect get in the way of a stopgap measure that is temporary but will greatly improve the lives of workforce here. So thanks for working on it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your comments.
What's gonna happen next, Sam? Married, a white picket fence? What's gonna go on in your
Well,
life?
I just want a little chicken coop like you, Trish. That's my dream. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Sam. All right, any other comments for citizens to be heard? All right, so we will move on to our discussion of Article 3 code amendments. There are 2 subtopics in here. The first is looking at draft language for the ADU, and then the temporary use, and we'll take these separately. So let's start with the ADU.
Yeah.
Maybe a quick status update, and then maybe just because I know there's some legal review, we might want to just like high comments would bring up.
Right, okay.
Sure. The red lights.
Yeah, so the ADU code update. This has been in process for, gosh, probably 3 months now at least. And we've had a lot of feedback from the attorney, a lot of feedback from the building official, and then of course from you all as well. So I've just tried to incorporate all of that and kind of balance it as best as I can. Because some of it is conflicting, which is making me realize that going forward with the temporary use section, I'm probably going to have that at a workshop. So because I think it'll just go faster, you know.
Yeah, I
it's
think that-
going back and forth the way we've been on this ADU section, it's been dragging out for too long. So anyway, but that's the next section. So this is some of the key issues that we're looking at, kind of wanting to get feedback from this body tonight is, well, the overarching thing that it's really going to be dependent on what the response is from some of the state people that we've reached out to, is whether or not we have to allow an internal ADU even when there's an external ADU already on the property. And right now, the way the attorney is interpreting it is that we do need to allow that based on the simple word language of the state legislation, that we would need to allow that. So essentially, we'd be allowing 3 dwelling units on an acre, on a parcel anywhere in the county.
An internal and an external.
Mhm.
Okay, got it.
Right. But we could actually say, well, if you're going to do an internal ADU, we're going to not allow an external ADU because they're not, the state isn't prohibiting any jurisdiction from limiting external ADUs. It's just internal. So I think we need to wait to hear back from, because we have put out some questions to state people in the legislature, planning office up there too. And so we're going to wait and hear back from them, and then I'll keep you guys updated. But ideally, we would like to say in the code, you can have an internal ADU or an external ADU, but not both. So that's how I originally wrote it, but then we had to change it.
Is there anything preventing, I'm just thinking about this and wondering how much of a, seems like there's an obvious loophole here to me. I can have, there's no restriction on internal, there's a restriction on external. So I could build an external ADU first.
True.
I could not tell anybody, but I could
That's
be like,
true.
I'm gonna build an external ADU and an
Yes,
internal
and then we
ADU,
would
but I'm
still
gonna do the
have to
external
allow,
first.
yes. Yeah, you're exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
Is there any reason I wouldn't want to help an applicant push them that way? I mean, if my goal is to help the applicant do what they can to get housing, is there any reason I shouldn't do
Well,
that?
I would say right now that it's so in flux.
Right
that-
now, of
Yeah,
course.
I mean, once we get it in the code, it's just gonna be what it is, so, you know.
So I'll share a just high-level summary of some of the topics I've seen called out that can help guide discussion. And then if there are specific points that anyone wants to point to within the written draft, we can go there. And I'll do this kind of off memory because I wrote it down at home. I didn't bring my notes in. So there's some comments related to development standards. The county is removing at the draft the clause, or doesn't believe we can define exterior standards based off of state law for ADUs to conform to the principal structure. That's one of the topics, just so everyone is aware. I raised the question of maximum height of ADUs. We define footprint, which we talked about last meeting, measured off the exterior footprint of up to 1,200 square feet. But I don't believe I saw any details on height. I do not to exceed the maximum height, even if it was placed over a garage. So how do we manage that?
Yeah, and I think that would just be a simple statement to say that the height must be in compliance with the underlying zoning standards. Which
Would we want to have a case where you had a house that had a additional 8 feet and then an ADU went 8 feet above the roof line of the house? It seems like maybe the roof line of the primary structure might be good.
maybe so, yeah, something to say. The height height of the underlying zone or the may not exceed the height of the principal structure, something like that.
So I'll just kind of list out some of the things I'm seeing and then we can invite any discussion. Specifying that they are not to be used for overnight rentals. That's one. I'll call out enforcement has been an issue in the county everywhere so far. Adding additional units to our residential zones comes at the potential cost of enforcement. So we should make sure we have consultation from Grand County Sheriff's Office on if there's any, I doubt there's anything we want to put in here, but just any considerations to hold. How do we define in what cases somebody can rent it to? I don't know. There was some question about, if you have two on the property, should we require that if one is rented with a lease, should it be deed restricted? Again, that comes with the question of enforcement, but it comes back to this question that we dealt with the HDHO, which is where we asked the residential areas to handle additional density. What guarantees can we make that that density will at least accommodate our workforce and our full-time residential population as opposed to other uses? I don't think any of that is resolved, but I saw that was a point of comment. Parking is another point of comment that's come up, and I don't think we have any consensus. I asked that we get some thoughts from Bill Hulse, just even around how we define the length of driveways and we're now talking about a potential unit that could be very far from the driveway of a home. Like, how do we want to handle that? I think that's something that could be a lurker and we should address. And then just maybe the notes section is worth pulling up at the bottom for some just crosstalk. So those are big ones. Anyone else see any themes before we have some discussion about what is in this draft?
No, but I was thinking about the height of the primary building. What if somebody is putting the ADU on the top of the garage? And so it's an interesting thing, but there may have to be exceptions and stuff, so it's interesting.
Trying to hide the comments, but it's not going very well.
Showing presentation mode, maybe?
So suggesting or viewing, but viewing. That's okay. So what I chose to have was.
Why don't we just pull up what's in the packet? I think that's.
Yeah, it is in the packet.
Yeah.
That's right. And I did type the comments in there. Okay, there we go. Show that. So the biggest change in this first section would to be consistent with down further where we were proposing to change or to allow a reduced setback if the height of the wall height of the structure is under 15 feet or less. You could go into the setback a little bit further. So the setback would go down to 5 feet for the side and rear setbacks. And so that's the biggest change there, just to be consistent. We did propose that down in the next actual ADU section. So the section A is kind of to the overall accessory structures standards. So that would also be for like sheds and garages.
One thing I see on that, now, I just went through this building a shed on my place, was that 5 feet restriction. Now, I tried to find in the code, but like Barry was like, oh, make sure that's fire retardant. And actually couldn't find that written in the code.
Building, it would be building code. The building code.
Yeah, is this
Yeah.
what we're, like, we're
No, well,
putting
this
on
is-
a,
This is the land use code.
oh, geez,
No, it's
okay, I
okay.
am so sorry,
It's
like,
all right.
sometimes
It
some of these
gets,
things,
it's related, but,
Okay.
and so I've been working with Bill, the building official,
Uh-huh.
on all of this so that it's consistent with building code. And
okay,
that's- This is one of the things that he said, it should be, that the structure needs to be over 5 feet because a little problem when it comes to building permit time. If it's just
Yeah.
a little bit over, then it won't fly, so,
right, okay, sorry.
yeah, no, it's okay.
Cause I just saw you quote like the IRC stuff and I was like, is this like, are you adding on to the IRC on top of it, restricting it further, or are you just,
No.
you're giving a how the IRC is gonna be implemented?
This is mainly just to do with how the structure sits on the property.
Okay,
So land
I get
use
you.
versus site standards versus like actual building.
okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Are we discussing this right now, or are you just presenting to us and then we
Oh.
can ask questions? I just wanted to clarify, so I don't keep interrupting.
Yeah.
What is the, yeah, I just want to make sure I
Yeah, you're
was
okay.
out of turn. And this might be covered elsewhere, and I might have missed it, but, no ADU should be established prior to principal use.
Right. So, in this section A here,
Yeah,
yeah, so basically, it's just saying like, you're not allowed to build a shed just on a property if there's not already a principal, like a house there.
if I have a lot where I'm building a house, but maybe I build a smaller
You
house
live in
first.
your house, your ADU first, yes.
So I
you
can
do
build an
that.
ADU, I just can't build a
Yeah,
shed.
you can, what you do is you, initially, it'll be your principal house.
Okay, cool,
And
great.
then once you build your house, you transfer that other one
Love
to the ADU and then, yeah, and there's a clause down here
Great.
that,
Oh, see, I
Says
read
that.
it the opposite way.
well, no,
Maybe
so
I-
what
okay.
you were commenting on was the thing up at the section A,
Okay,
but that's just for like all structures.
yeah,
And then when it gets down to ADUs, it
Uh-huh.
says here,
okay, I see.
Yeah.
An ADU may be permitted as accessory use to, okay.
Is that current?
yes,
Code standards?
Yeah.
So what if somebody owns property and they
you can
build
build
a
your,
Quonset hut? They just
it
like,
has to be permitted by it has to be a building. You have to get a building permit for,
you can get a building permit to put a shed on a lot of land that you own.
you
just
can't live in your
You
shed
can't just
though.
live in it. Yeah,
No.
that's fine. Okay, I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing something.
No, when it comes to like sheds, other accessory structures, you can't build those without the house already on the
So
property.
no accessory use or structure shall be established prior to the principal use or
Right,
structure. to
In
which it is
general.
Accessory.
and then when you get down into the actual ADU section for dwellings, when it comes to dwellings.
Yeah.
You are allowed to build your ADU, but you can't call it, you can't permit it as an ADU. It's your principal
Right.
dwelling.
I think just A3 is confusing me, the language. Like,
Yeah.
you can't build a structure until you build a house, doesn't. If I'm reading that literally, I don't know that it's. clear.
Yeah, I think just, it was a little, that's kind of where I was.
Yeah.
Getting goofed up on it.
Yeah, I think it's just to do with structures, not, I mean, I could say, we could add to this and say, to clarify it. Except where otherwise stated, because then down below, it does make an exception.
I assume the county could faithfully interpret this. I just was
Yeah.
getting really confused by the language.
Yeah, it just means basically, we're not allowing you to build a shed on a property without any other building already established
That's
on it.
I think there are lots of examples of people who build a shed to store tools they're gonna use to build their house, maybe. So if that is the literal interpretation, I think this needs.
And I don't know if that's a building code thing,
Well, I've
but
seen just in other places that I've worked at, that if someone does that, the use is actually clarified as warehousing, and it would be listed as a principal use permitted in that zoning district. But if it's just a shed sitting there, it's accessory, and it can't be an accessory structure unless it's accessory to an already existing
right,
principal use.
the whole idea of accessory is that it's an accessory to the principal use.
Right, I understand that. I just think, let's clarify that that could be interpreted so as it wouldn't allow somebody who is building their own home or potentially uses, somebody may buy a property in the county and builds a shed to store their recreational vehicles for use when they're visiting and, doesn't need to build a home. for any number of people who camp on their land, so like out in the world.
Right.
So I think this needs a little work.
Okay. Now we can look at that.
Steve, I don't want to lose you. Any comments that you want to add at this point, or feel free to jump in at any time?
Okay, great, thanks.
Inclusive remote communication is what we're aiming for.
The next kind of big changes or additions to this code would be obviously mentioning, kind of distinguishing the definition between an EADU and an IADU, and then how those pertain to duplexes. And one of the things that Bill wanted to bring up is that in terms of building code, if you were to have a duplex that had an attached ADU, but that's also considered, it could be external because it's not in the footprint of the existing home. Then you could also have an internal ADU, which is within the footprint of the existing home, but it would all be basically sharing walls and would turn the building type into R3, which requires different things for fire safety. So that's another reason, if we can get this clarified with the state people to let us only permit one ADU per lot, then we don't have to deal with all of this confusing language when it comes to the building code. It just really doesn't, it doesn't work with building code.
So that is interesting, because one interpretation of the state would say that a duplex has legal right to have an internal ADU.
Yes.
And so you didn't have an external ADU, they could still do that. And then you'd be in this R3, and then they'd have to change a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
it might not be cost effective
It
for
might
them
not.
to do it.
Yeah,
Interesting.
So somebody who owns an acre of land in the county could, I don't mean to deal in pure hypotheticals, but could build a duplex with internal ADUs on each unit, or at least one ADU.
I think one ADU.
Internal ADU.
Yeah.
And not get it permitted, and then construct an external ADU, and then get the internal, that we could go from 1 unit per lot to 4 units per lot. I don't anticipate that being a common thing, but if somebody bought 3 acres, they could have 12 houses, or 12 units.
And that's where you always go when you're kind of thinking in planning terms. You're like, well, what could the maximum potential be for the loopholes and whatnot? And so I just don't think that the state was really thinking of that in terms of Grand County being we're so open to ADUs to begin with. And there are a lot of communities in Utah that aren't. And so that's where this HB 82 requirement was geared towards those communities that aren't allowing ADUs in their neighborhoods at all. So it's just,
2 of those 4 units would be rentals, so I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing. It just that is a possible.
it is, yes.
Both cars.
Parking is an issue.
So
But now you have one per ADU, right?
parking space, yeah. So that was at the suggestion of Bill and others in our department that felt like we can't really be planning for not requiring parking, at least 1 parking space per ADU, when we don't have an alternative established for public transit at this time. We can't assume that people are going to be able to ride their bikes. And we don't want to have a situation where we're increasing parking on street, street versus on site. But to your question, Emily, I haven't gotten an answer yet, but I'm thinking that, and maybe Jenna, you might know off the cuff, that space would not need to necessarily be paved. It could be gravel, it could be dirt. So it's, yeah, that's what I thought.
I just don't want the cost of
It would
concrete.
Right, no, not paved, but concrete is what your question was, yeah, right, so we don't have to require that, it doesn't have to be an actual concrete surface, it can be primitive kind of parking space, as long as there's a space. Yeah, and then we have, of course, the reduced setback for the height. And I did have a little 3D model that I was working on to show you guys this, and I didn't finish it in time for this meeting. So I'll have to get that out to you because it kind of shows what the reduced setback would allow in terms of anything that's under 15 feet and how that would relate to neighboring properties and structures, and how on some lots that are maybe around 7,000 square feet or 6,000 square feet, we don't have a lot of those, but we wouldn't be able to fit an ADU on a lot of those smaller lots if we didn't have the setback. So it's a way to encourage the construction of ADUs, maybe just slightly, but
Maybe one thing I'd like to throw out there, just because I heard it come up earlier about, possibly doing some height restrictions on the ADUs. And then I would say that I would be against doing that, because I mean, it's already going to have to comply with the underlining zone, and I think I'm in favor of just keeping it like that. So I just want to voice that. Maybe an example might be, if you have a lot that has different elevations on it, in your primary house you put up, that's on the higher one, and you only want that to be, let's say 15 feet, on this lower one, the site may really adequately have a layout where you could have a garage underneath it, and then the building could be 25 feet tall, and I think it'd be just fine. But if we did limit the height of those ADUs, then they would be, I think, unnecessarily constrained in that case. So just putting some voice to that. That's my opinion on it.
Yeah, I see a lot of like single family homes that people want to unfold. Like I know a lot of people that like want to unfold their like lots that they have. And that's a popular like mode. It's like, oh, you could have the garage, which is the parking space, that person's storage. They tend to be younger people that can climb those stairs, but now we're at like minimum 16 feet. So like, you're saying if it's 5 feet of setback, you can't do 15
right. So the way that you would get the reduced setback is if you kept your height
down on 5 feet. So if
Yeah.
it's 10 feet, you could do the height.
Right, if you're within the setback,
Yeah.
you can go up to
Yeah.
the height. That's how we have it written
Uh-huh.
now.
I see.
That it would have to be consistent with the underlying zone.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I see is usually they're trying to put it in the corner.
Right.
And then it's like that little corridor of access is like, 50, yeah.
It does get
Anyways,
tight.
yeah, it's tight. Yeah.
Yeah, we could look at that. I think I could probably have my little diagram that I was
Right.
creating.
What
for
I
you
see with
guys.
this is your 15 feet is the loft version. Like you're gonna build something with a loft.
Yeah,
in
or
it.
like, yeah.
Yeah,
I think that was the wall height even, so you would still have a little space for. a
Okay.
fixture.
Huh.
And that was suggested by Bill again, too, that the 15 feet wall height would be acceptable, but yeah, we can look at it some more too and it helps to visualize it for sure.
a 5 foot setback and somebody puts up a 15-foot wall. That's a big imposing wall on your property. So,
Right.
They're looking down at you while you're
yeah.
Yeah, so I
making
mean,
breakfast.
we could consider that we want to reduce that height even more in order to get that setback. reduced. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So the permit requirements are just kind of clarifying and making sure that we have everything that we need and it's clarified for the applicant and for our department to review ADUs. The last thing is just the occupancy requirements. We already have in the code existing is this covenant that should be recorded that says that the ADU shall not be condominiumized or sold separately. And then, of course, not rented on a nightly or weekly basis. And then to go further, we were proposing at our last meeting, we got brought up that we could deed restrict them, some of these ADUs for workforce housing. And so one of my comments that I kind of keep coming back to is that if we start to enforce our nightly or illegal nightly rentals in a way that is more effective, which we are going to be able to do that once we get our new software. But the deed restriction might not be necessary because it's already illegal to occupy these ADUs.
That
more
seems,
than-
it seems burdensome to me.
Yeah.
And it's confusing. Like if I want my mother to move in next to my house.
The
do I need
deed
her to get a
restriction?
Job. Yeah, I think.
I know, and
yeah.
that's the thing, like, as soon as you start getting into figuring out how we would parse that out, it just becomes very complicated, and I think it's overcomplicating our code, which we don't want to do. We want to try to keep it as simple as possible, and we already do regulate them to not be used as for nightly rentals, so I don't know if we need this section in here for the employee housing.
I agree. Does anyone have any thoughts?
It would be, it's a big, I know we spent some time on it. So to just take it out would be kind of like, well,
Well, deed restrictions, when you have a larger development and a single contact.
Yeah.
That can be administrated effectively, but in a neighborhood of single family homes where 3 people have an ADU, you're not enforcing it. Which
well,
is why
that's the
I
thing,
would-
like who would be enforcing it? It would
Yeah.
probably have to be HASU, which we haven't even talked to them about if they want to take that workload on. And I think it would be easier to enforce the nightly rental thing versus the deed restriction. So I think ultimately that's the way to go.
And to have the covenant, if there were excessive complaints by neighbors, that would also add teeth to that.
Right. Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
My only hesitation is with the secondary residence situation, but like we're discussing, it's already not supposed to be used for that. So I don't see why we need to add another layer of convolution. to it.
Yes,
So,
exactly. It's a little redundant, so I think we'll take that out of there and scrap it. That was it for ADUs, except for, let's see, we had just the definitions down here that are defining the internal versus the external, and then we need to add definitions for primary residence and secondary, which that's a different, that's Article 10, so that'll be, we're gonna have a lot of updates to Article 10 as a result of these code updates, just to get all of our definitions in line, so.
So this is available for comment as well. The draft sent to everybody. What is the timing for public hearing on these changes?
Yes, so this, I'm hoping we would just, at the very next meeting, because this is close. We were gonna have the public hearing for this meeting, but we didn't get the feedback yet from all the different entities that we need, so. Yeah, the next planning commission should be hearing for this.
Cool.
Okay.
Should we move on? Temporary uses. I didn't see this.
Oh, I did have these pictures in here, yeah. Current ADUs in the community that I thought were kind of cool. This 2-story one is pushing the square feet allowance, but it does provide a nice living space for, even for a small family in a tiny kind of situation. Okay, so section 3.3.3 is the temporary use standards, and there's a lot in this section. Because we are including the temporary dwelling permit as a new thing. So we have worked with we did meet, as far as the temporary dwelling permit, we did meet with one of the businesses representatives, and we've been on the phone with others. And in terms of the other updates to the film production, I've been in touch with Vega from the Film Commission, and she has a lot of input. We actually just had a really good meeting today, which I'm probably going to have some updates to the section based on her comments that I just got today. But I can go through those as we get to them. So some of the key issues for temporary uses is kind of understanding, like in general, how this relates to our use table. In most land use codes that I'm familiar with, your temporary uses are not included in your zoning district table. So they're not, because they're not, you know, entitled uses. So your underlying zone would not include temporary uses in that table, where you either have like a permit or a conditional use permit. These are temporary uses, so it's their own section. So that's just something to be thinking about too, but I know there's probably different ideas on that. And then trying to differentiate between, I've been working with Christina's office to try to figure out, and now too a little bit on special event permitting that they're doing an update to that. So trying to figure out how we kind of draw the line between what is a temp use and what's a special event. And so that would have to do with the timing of the event, the duration of the event, the capacity, the amount of people. So we're trying to narrow that down. And then of course, the temporary dwelling permit. So the issues there, we have the number of mobile units allowed and the corresponding minimum parcel size. So I'll just go down into this sort of code language so we can kind of get into that if you all want to. Those are general provisions, temporary dwelling permit. So I added some circumstances where a temporary dwelling permit would be needed. So it's not just the seasonal employees, it's also the idea of during construction of your permanent dwelling that maybe you would want to live in something that's not your ADU, but you're like an actual RV, something like that. And then we have, of course, the circumstances where people are displaced from a disaster. So I thought that was a good example. I found that in another code. And then kind of here's some of the meat of the code in terms of the parcel sizes and, you know, thinking about what this would look like on the ground in neighborhoods and trying to really address the impacts that we might be seeing.
Would you prefer that we review this and then go through edits and then have discussion at a public hearing? If we see anything we want to call out, would you like us to raise it? What would be most effective and helpful to you?
I guess if there's any like major red flags that you're thinking that in the direction that we're going with this draft that needs to be called out at this point, then I would love to hear. And otherwise, comments can be coming in, you know, through this format.
So just calling out after the meeting, go home, check your email, make sure you have access, edit access to the Google Doc, and we'll use that just as we did with the general plan to track changes.
Yeah, and I do think that I would like to bring this to a workshop, maybe with our land use steering committee. And talk to John about that, because it would be great to have a couple members of the commission looking at this early on and weighing in.
I'd be set to do that.
I'd love John as soon as possible.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know if I'll use the word love to do that.
Right.
but-
Right.
Wow, that's a little.
But you would.
Yeah.
No, it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just run through a couple of the other sections. We have our original temporary uses that were in there dealing with asphalt, batch plant, field office, sales office. Those are remaining And then, of course, the film production. So some of the comments that Vega had were, and others from the Utah Film Commission were just to say, we need to really figure out if we're trying to require a TUP, an actual permit for filming activity on private land versus most areas from what I've learned today don't require that when the filming activity is on private property, but just that we would state in our temporary use section that filming on private property is a permitted temporary use. But if you were to do that activity in the public right of way, like in any kind of county roads or county owned property, then the permit would be required. So I'm still kind of looking into that distinction and figuring out, I don't want to, we don't want to be duplicative in our processes that the Film Commission already does. She already has a lot of things that she kind of puts the folks through in terms of vetting them and getting them set up to film in the county. So I'm working closely with her. We don't want to make this restrictive, you know, in any way. I mean, just in the sense that we would want to know any of the major impacts that could be occurring in neighborhoods, you know, to adjacent properties. Noise, obviously, light, pollution, that kind of thing. So, yeah. Any kind of initial thoughts in terms of film production? There's a lot there. Yeah. Yeah.
Do we have, we specify number of complaints under the temporary dwelling?
Yeah.
Do we have similar specifications for filming?
Oh, we don't. Yeah, we don't have that. That could almost be like a general provision. It could just be a blanket provision.
I put this in note, but I think it's worth a discussion just around unifying our code. There's 3 violations in Title 5, right? So anywhere we can just be consistent.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Sure. And I do think citations, not just complaints.
Right, not just complaints. I agree. Yeah, actual. That's where it goes to that point. That's a citation. Yeah, so this is kind of the beginning of this section. There's a lot in there. I'm trying to consolidate things so that we have the general provisions that kind of apply to all temporary uses instead of repeating them in each temporary use section. I have not gotten to writing up anything for food trucks and pop-ups, but as we all know, the food trucks are allowed to operate with a business license anywhere in Utah. But we can have some provisions for where they can operate and can't require them to submit something ahead of time to us, but we can enforce compliance. You see something going on that's not good.
Any additional comments or discussion? Do we feel like we could get a workshop? Do we feel like we could get this noticed publicly for our next planning commission meeting? It's still time for a workshop.
That's a good question. I'll have to look at the calendar. Because that's always the tricky thing is the noticing deadline comes up pretty quickly right after these meetings. So, yeah, I'll have to look at that and get back to you.
So if you were to do that at the next meeting, the noticing deadline would be this Friday.
Thank you. This Friday, yes. Oh my goodness, yeah. So, thank you, Jenna. She's my reality check.
I just wonder if, you know, given that we are using Google Docs to track changes here publicly like we have with the general plan, there are people in this county going into the summer season whose current housing is in jeopardy.
Right.
And I would love to see us move forward as fast as possible.
Yeah.
We're already in this season.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe that's something.
I have sent, Christina does have both of these sections. She's already weighed in on the ADU section a lot, so I think we're pretty close with her on that. But the temporary use, we haven't gotten comments back from the attorney's office. So
between the two, I'd rather see this come before us first, a public hearing, if we had to have a trade-off. Yeah, let us know it's feasible, but I think getting to a recommendation and there's an opportunity to continue to revise with the county commission plus a 2-week.
See, that's the thing. I feel like it could be doable for a public hearing for the planning commission, because we still have an opportunity to make changes after that.
Even if
Somewhat.
we had to split this in two and do the housing part first and do the temporary filming permit second. I
Yeah.
just, given that we know there are residents of our community who are working in this community currently in this situation that our citizen comment addressed.
Yeah, I hear you.
Normally wouldn't push that hard, but
No, it's urgent, absolutely.
in that person living in my truck, in the back of the guide lot. Okay. Any further discussion, comment on this topic? Please, just given the fact that we want to move fast on this, check your email, make sure you've vetted access to the doc, get comments in. If there's any that require legal review, we want to get them in as fast as possible. So specifically look for things that might need consideration of the county attorney, and then hopefully we can make a decision in the next few days about how we feel about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for everything. This is like manifested out of nowhere in a month. It's just amazing. And I really appreciate staff's continued work on this.
On top of an inbox that has 880 emails in it.
I know that mortifies me. Can I just tell you? that
Oh,
that just
Trish,
causes me
same.
great
Oh my
pain.
God.
Oh, that has to be from like before I even got here, because I don't have that many emails that I have to open. I do open my emails every day.
Okay, so we are already, it's nearly 6:30. We've got a few other items under future considerations. Any of these that require discussion, or are these more to update and just provide general information?
So I've scrolled down in my agenda.
So
Which one are we on first?
I think that's, yeah, transportation master plan,
Right.
boat ramp.
Okay, so the UTMP, just to let you guys know, the comment period is open and through July, I can't remember what it is now, but it's still open. There's plenty of time to comment. And then the June 23rd open house is going to be at the Grand Center, and that's open to the public for general comment, and they'll have all of the big maps laid out. June 23rd, 4 to 6. And we should be getting they made up some really nice flyers to put around. And I thought they were going to send those to me today, but tomorrow I'll be able to circulate that stuff. So we can start putting the word out after that. And then the boat ramp, John, I'll let you talk about that.
Okay, yeah, so just to highlight the UTMP with the city. There's a list of road projects, we went over this last time, and a list of trails projects. And then there's also a list of strategies and plans that helps integrate as much as possible with the UDOT responsibility on the highways. And so they've got a really good public outreach process, which we talked about today, coming out, and it's amazing. So I think the more you can invite people in your circle to the meeting, the 4 to 6 meeting next Thursday, the better. It's hard to get people to come to master planning processes, in my experience, partially because it's so high level. But this one's got a lot of project stuff in it, and it's all posted on our GCC, Grand County Connects, and it's also on their website. That link is there too. So just to restate that. The boat ramp application for a grant is, Elise is going to be taking that over, lucky girl. And that'll add to her email inbox, right, Steve? So that's actually got lots of legs. There's lots of money out there. The only thing is we need to weigh in with 25%. We had a high-level engineering analysis done on this, and that's those numbers are in. It's about, I think the total with all of the paving and the boat ramp was put in around $800,000 for capital. So we're figuring about 10% of that is engineering. Actually, I think it was less than that. And then we would have, the county would have a an obligation to come up with 25%. And there's different ways of doing that. We're suggesting that potentially that would be tapped in from the planning and zoning budget, which we have some money for. So it's really an important project, we believe, and I think a lot of people believe, lots of active users, lots of conflicts there, some of them very dangerous. So it's a great project. We've had a lot of support from users and from the National Park Service. Tony's not on the call here, but he's really been supportive in getting things going too. So we thought we'd just bring this to the Planning Commission as information and let you know that it's the grant application will be before the Planning and the County Commission at the next meeting. I don't know if there's any questions about that.
Is that a final site plan or is that a draft site plan?
It's a draft. It's high level, so it's what's called a class 5. So it's meant to be more conceptual. The actual engineering design will be somewhat different. But any comments you've got, we're certainly open to them.
Yay. Where would one submit those comments?
To me,
To you directly?
Elisa would be better because I'm leaving.
Okay.
You could send them to me too, but there's a forwarding email address coming. Oh, you've seen it, I think, Nikita. So
I think what we should do is fly to Spain and we can give John our
Right.
comments
I
there.
think that's good. I think that's the only way to do it, actually.
Yeah, that would be the responsible thing.
The county can pay for it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't want to get into the weeds here, John, but I'm assuming you guys have dealt with the water load out there. You've been in discussion. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I think that's been beaten to death. But we don't mind carrying on the beating. You want to?
Okay, general plan implementation strategy.
Okay, so we were hoping corporately to bring forward, I've got the PowerPoint presentation together with a whole list of priorities with the Planning Commission, but we wanted to go through an internal review first with department heads, especially roads, building, economic development, Maddie or a parks reference there, and then prioritize those so we bring some ideas back so you have some things to look at. So that's going to be on Elisa's plate as well, and Jenna. And so that's kind of where that's at. She could share whatever she wants. She'll have all of that. It's kind of a scripted PowerPoint presentation for implementation. And which is really important for the Planning Commission's kind of work plan for the next, I don't know, 20 years. We're all here starting 20 years. So that's that. And then the other thing that was there was the Unified Development Code. So we're working, I think we've touched on this. Correct me if I'm wrong. And Emily, have we touched on this before? So this would be a combined code that would include roads, zoning, building, fire, sewer, water, signs, noise. I've got business licenses being written in there, and it's heavy with development standards, building orientation, setback, heights, how the buildings are framed against the roads themselves, the set itself too. And I might be missing a couple of other references, but that framework we've got. I was hoping to get this done. The administration section's drafted. It's 100 pages. The general to the zones is about 100 pages, and then the specific to the zones is about another 100 pages. So there's 300 pages so far, and there's lots of questions. So at a certain point in time, Elisa, if she thinks it's valuable, will be bringing this to the Planning Commission.
All in good time. Yeah, for now, glad to see them talking to each other. Okay. All right. That's it from you, John? Signing off.
Yeah, and you're very, you want to keep things tight. So it's been 2 hours, Emily. So
Once we hit 2 hours, it all goes downhill, unlike our up and to the right tax payments. John, before we hit this last bullet, I just want to say thank you. I'm going to talk to the owl. Thank you for everything that you have done in the last year. It is dramatic to see the amount of activity and public engagement and outreach and participation. For those of us who have been on these bodies for more than a few laps around the sun, I will just say the degree of public engagement and participation from many different communities within our county has been impressive, and I'm so grateful for it and for everything you've done for the county. So thank you very much, and I wish you all the best in your travels, and I hope you'll host us all sometime in Spain.
Oh, and just to echo, because you're going to be an echo coming back, Emily, you guys are great to work with. That's what makes it easier. And the best part of planning is coming, because that's the grassroots neighborhood planning part. So getting the general plan drafted, which was great, getting that support there from both commissions, obviously, and all of the people involved was great. And so I think you've got a really, to me, maybe at least it feels like I'm dropping everything and running, taking off to the east instead of the west. But to me, you've got a pretty rosy horizon here.
Indeed. All right. Well, thank you, John. Salutations. Mic drop.
I know, exactly, mic drop.
Let's take just a minute or two just to talk through this last item, next meeting, making sure we're on the same page, and then.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you guys a heads up that I am working on that map for the OAO build out. So that's coming.
Thank you.
And then we also wanted to possibly bring up the HDHO or just in general, workforce housing, actively employed housing definition and how we're defining that, because there's been some developments on how we could maybe simplify that process for HASU. And we're meeting with HASU tomorrow. So we're gonna be talking about, because they're starting to get more occupants in the deed restricted housing units there. So they're having to kind of really implement what their charge is in enforcing that. So in qualifying people.
Do we have workforce housing as a definition in our code?
We don't. I don't believe we do. I've looked for it, and I think it would be defined as actively employed. And it's defined in the HDHO section in the rules and regulations that are embedded in that.
I almost wonder if it's, rather than focusing on HDHO specifically, if we, because there is actively employed, but I also want to make sure that we accommodate care work, which is non-waged, and that we consider people who are not employed but have children in the schools.
And that's the thing. That's why I think we need to look at this definition, because right now it seems problematic the way that it's limited in that way.
I'll just recommend that if it's possible, let's separate this from HDHO.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. That's it for me. Any other future considerations? Steve, we didn't get a chance to talk through your item. Do you feel like we sufficiently addressed it earlier, or is there anything that you wanted to add?
I think right now I feel good with that where it's at, and we'll take a look at the next set of minutes. And I like that idea of time stamping, so I won't go any further than that. I think we're good.
Okay.
Are you thinking per section? Or are you gonna
Sorry?
discuss it a little bit more? Time stamping per section, per discussion item?
I think per section, if there's major sort of changes in the flow of the conversation, for example, we talked through ADUs, we had the conversation around permitting, we had the conversation, it might just be nice to just wrap it. But I would say, let's bias towards that, but balancing it with the amount of time you spend on the minutes, because it shouldn't become a full-time job just writing minutes.
No problem. Yeah, and most of the other minutes, I was pretty careful to capture each individual who was talking.
Cool.
I'll do that a little better as well. And as far as time stamping, it would be a little cumbersome to try to do the actual time as opposed to the time on.
Yes.
That's
Right.
all done.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The time out.
And
We've done it in the
Yeah.
past because we have the time that the meeting starts, and then
That's
everything is relative to the YouTube
Yeah,
meeting as well.
exactly.
So you can watch it.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, that'd be horrible if they were like that.
Gabe's been,
Real world
Gabe's
time.
been doing that. It's
Yeah,
been
right.
pretty cool. Yeah, but it is it's a help.
Okay.
Yeah, on his minutes. So it's a nice addition.
Any other future considerations? So edits on the docs, we'll get a decision in the next few days about public hearing. Just want to emphasize, even if we have to slice it out, I'd love to see it. That's just, you make the decision based off your workload. And if there's no additional things, go and let's have a motion.
I make a motion to adjourn this lovely meeting.
Steve, you let OB get ahead of you, but I heard a second. All in favor? Fabulous. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Lisa, thank you so much, and Jenna, for